Welcome to Wide Angle Wednesday. I am Robert with Zenfolio. I'm glad for you guys to join us. Today, we're going to be talking about getting started in high volume photography. I've got an amazing panelist of photographers joining me today. I'm going to give them all a second to introduce themselves.
My name is Nikki Doo. I have been photographing preschools since 1997. I'm known as the preschool queen. And the one thing that I can say is that's the funnest age because the kids smile so cute and the parents spend a lot of money on packets.
Brian Bailey, get shot by Brian. Located in South Jersey here, not too far, actually in between Atlantic City and Philly. We do sports, high school seniors, leagues, high school sports, corporate headshots, corporate volume, or corporate video as well.
I'm Nathan Phillips, and I'm a school photographer in Berkeley, California. And I primarily do elementary schools. I have a few preschools. I agree with Nikki. I think 4 is the perfect age because they can follow directions, they're adorable, and there's still a very good chance that you have just taken the best photo of them ever.
I also happen to do youth sports photography as well. I've photographed youth sports for probably the past, I would say 6 or 7 years, right up until I recently stopped photographing last March. Actually, not due to COVID, but due to ready to have my weekends back, to be quite honest. My son was getting a little older. I was ready to start spending some time with him and doing youth sports volume photography year out every single weekend. This first question is how and why did you get started in volume photography? I'm going to throw this one to Nathan first. Nathan, you've got 2 minutes.
Oh, geez, time pressure. I got started in volume photography because when I became a full-time photographer, which somehow is 10 years ago, I was struggling to make money. And I realized I either had to increase the value of each photo or I had to sell a ton of them. And especially as a new photographer, I really didn't know how to, get someone to pay a lot more for one photo. I didn't have a lot of corporate clients, but I'm in my hometown. I have a lot of connections. I know a lot of schools. My daughter at the time was 4. She's 12 now. So I moved into schools and I started working with an established company because I didn't know how to run a school photography business. But they actually got me started off right away with business development. They wanted me to grow their business in my area, which I did. I got a whole bunch of contracts for them, and I was the lead photographer on picture day. So I was making commissions on both the sales as a photographer and as the client manager. When I stopped working for them, I already had the experience and the skill set to grow a volume photography business.
I kind of have a stranger story because I never even thought about being a photographer. Wasn't even on my radar. I was running a preschool in Hawaii and that was my home. I loved it. And the day that I found out that the pastor's wife was going to take my job and I was going to have to look for a new job after being at this place for 10 years, Teddy Bear Portraits was in my school and photographed my preschool children. And after the photo shoot, this woman asked me, she goes, have you ever thought about being a photographer? I'm like, I don't even own a camera. She goes, I'm here from the mainland and we're looking for a photographer. She goes, you're really good with kids and I can't teach that, but I can teach you how to use a camera. So that was an answered prayer. And I took a month off Well, I was going to get laid off anyway. So I took a 1-month vacation and I trained under this woman. And back then we had this big, huge camera that had 600 pictures in it. And there was no automatic focus. And I still have this tripod that weighs like 50 pounds. And so that's how I started. I stayed with Teddy Bear Portraits until 2010. And not until 2011 did I know how to shoot when the camera wasn't locked. So my first part of my career, I just listened to a system and we were really fortunate in Hawaii. I knew how to get natural smiles. So I was between number 1 and number 2 in Teddy Bear Portraits and sales. And it was all about expressions. So for all you new people watching us today and thinking, oh, I don't even know where to start. The biggest thing about portraits and selling school pictures, especially in these times, if you take a good expression of a child with a natural smile, I don't care what you're going to sell it.
Just like I said, I started out in sports, shooting high school, college stuff, some pro stuff, and transitioned into, I forgot to mention this, but our biggest part of our business is cheer and dance competitions, right? Started out working for the company that shoots all the varsity.com stuff. Then we started working, I actually started helping them with my IT background when the servers would go down, things like that. I said, you know what, I can do this. So we actually started our own cheer and dance company, shooting cheer and dance competitions. I've worked for some of the star power brands, and we would actually print on site. So we would shoot tethered, shoot it to the server, print on site. So it's kind of like volume printing, right? So we sold all that. So I was like, I think we could do this on our own. So we started doing that a little bit. And then, again, being in sports, my kid was in sports. So one of the local football teams said, hey, can anybody put in a Wi-Fi router? So I was like, hey, I can do that. So I started talking to the guy. I put in his Wi-Fi router, and he's like, do you take pictures? I was like, sure. So he said, you know what, we want to get away from our photographer for volume sports. I was like, yeah, I can do that. So, okay, great. Let's have a meeting. So set up a meeting. I ran back to my wife and said, hey, we need to figure out volume sports. So we kind of took what we did printing on site, and we just kind of included doing the same type of thing, but doing it with leagues. And we went from football to baseball to cheer to dance and it just exploded from there. But it was all from just that one little thing of helping somebody out with something I had nothing to do with volume sports, actually.
What is the minimal gear that you would recommend for somebody just getting into volume photography? So I want to take a step back because we can really go into a lot of stuff. Let's forget all the admin stuff and just focus on strictly just going out and shooting volume photography. What's the minimal gear that you would recommend? I'm going to throw this one over to Brian first. So go ahead, Brian, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, we just use for volume sports, 5D4, and the cheap $99 50 millimeter was at 1.8, right? So, we green screen. So we green screen everything. So you could buy a cheap green screen, X stand or something like that, and a couple of lights. You can use flashes. We use the flash points, which are $100. So, I mean, you can get into it relatively easy, and you don't need a big camera or expensive lens. I mean, a $99 lens looks tack sharp. So that's about all I think you need to start out. Nothing fancy.
I suggest to keep it simple. Also, I have a 3-light system of Alien B. I've been using that since 1997 also. And I have a camera, and I have now I have slaves, but you could use the cord. One thing though that I would recommend to all the photographers out there is know your equipment. It doesn't matter what brand you buy. It matters what you are comfortable with. How do you want to maneuver, your gadgets? Because there's always going to be new products out there, and just a little, my lens, which was another $199 lens, has made me hundreds and thousands of dollars throughout the year. Like, you don't need. Another little trick that I'm just going to say really quick is I have strings on my lights. So I have a main light and a fill light, and they have strings towards the subject and towards the ground. So if you make a system, make it so you can repeat it every time you go someplace, so you don't have to think about it. I would suggest to just stay simple, but have a system.
The gear itself is not that important. It's definitely not as important as your ability to work with a kid and get the expression. I do things a little bit differently though. I shoot outside. So I'm always fighting natural light. It gets complicated, but it's also what I do that differentiates me from a lot of my competition. So it helps me get the job. So I'm always tempted to go inside because it's so much simpler, and it's repeatable and it's consistent. But then again, I probably wouldn't have gotten the job if that's what I was offering the school. So for me, I'm shooting everything at usually f3.5 because I want separation from a natural background. So I would just say get a camera that has good autofocusing. And it's one of the reasons, like 3 years ago, I switched from Canon to Sony, is their eye tracking was unbeatable. It's still, I mean, Canon at least is catching up. I don't know about others. But I can set a really shallow depth of field, and I don't have to worry about focus. The photos are just going to be in focus. And that was the most important thing to me. Way more important than the lens, way more important than megapixels focus.
A lot of people get wrapped up in the gear, right? So if you already have some really expensive gear and you're looking at getting into volume photography, I'll tell you exactly what I use for doing youth sports. I used a Nikon D90. When I was shooting outside, I used an SB600 speedlight, and I shot all that on the kit lens that came with that, which was the 18-105. I think you can find that complete setup used for under $500, like definitely under $500 if you're looking for it used. I also used a really cheap tripod that I bought used as my volume kit because I was outside. I was a lot of times on the field or around just huge crowds of people with young kids. And it doesn't matter how many times you ask parents to keep their kids off of your gear, it's gonna happen. And I've had my tripod kicked over more than once. Luckily, always make sure that you have insurance. Insurance is definitely important, but luckily it wasn't my really expensive gear that I was personally attached to that was getting destroyed. It was the stuff that I purposely bought to go use this. So definitely make sure that you are thinking about that. You don't have to have, like everybody said, the top of the line gear. I love that Nikki said, come up with a system so that you can repeat everything. So important. I had a little chart actually written out for when I did indoors where everything was measured out exactly the same. We light metered everything and got it all set up. Obviously, it's important to know how to improvise if the space that you're given doesn't work for your system. I've been put in some really tight spots and can only use one light. So it's important to know, how to bounce the light off the wall and different things like that. But again, as everybody said, gear's not the most important thing. Do you shoot in RAW, JPEG, or both? Or maybe you vary depending on what you're shooting and why. So I'm going to throw that to Nathan first, and then we'll come back to everybody else. I'm going to see what Nathan has to say.
So I shoot RAW because I'm outside and I have to. A cloud can come cover the sun out of nowhere, and suddenly you're more than a stop underexposed. Or it's a cloudy day and you're dialed in and the sun pops out and now you're a stop overexposed. Or, I hire photographers and they're all professionals, but sometimes they don't notice that the light has been changing gradually over the last half hour and suddenly we're way over underexposed. And I need to be able to recover detail that I would have lost. I had some nasty photos this year because we had to be in some different locations. I was in a spot where the background was a light colored, like concrete playground, and they were backlit by the sun. And it looked like they were on the surface of the sun. But I was able to recover highlights from the background because I was in RAW. There's no way I would have been able to do it with JPEG. I would love to do JPEG. And if I was inside, I would probably be consistent, dialed in with JPEG. It'd be faster, the files are smaller. I could do a lot more stuff. But because of the choices I've made as a photographer, I got myself into this. I'm forced to do RAW.
I will photograph both. If I'm outside, I'll do RAW. If I do indoors, I'll do JPEG because my lights are set. But one thing that I've learned throughout the years is every time you buy a new camera, the RAW might not read in your old computer. I don't know if anybody else has had those issues. So I have like 3 laptops right now, Apple laptops, that don't read my new 5Ds RAW images. And so sometimes, and that's just because I don't want to update my systems, because what happens in our industry is if you update your system, you might lose a program that you bought that's discontinued. So one thing that's happened to me in our industry is every couple of years I have to buy a new laptop so that it is compatible with my camera. So that's been one of my struggles, I think. So I have, in my world, I love some of the old programs that are no longer around. That's why.
We do shoot inside, like some were saying we don't shoot outside. All our stuff's dialed in, right? But we still shoot raw. When we get back, we still want to tweak a little bit of the color. Or we actually, we have a color chart to make sure everything's accurate. But then we export everything to TIFF, and then we extract via TIFF, and then file as JPEG. If we were to do it in JPEG and then do all that stuff, the JPEG would then become muddy and it would become pixelated. So you have to kind of start raw and then go down to a JPEG. You can't really start out JPEG, or you could start out JPEG, but every time you save a JPEG, the resolution, the picture just gets worse and worse. So all raw. And again, it preset in Lightroom takes, only a couple minutes to output to a JPEG. So we like to make sure and again, sometimes, you could have somebody, hits the wrong button and all of a sudden now the color's off or something's wrong and you got to go fix it. I mean, it's happened rarely, but it does sometimes happen. So we want to make sure we have everything that we can have to fix it if we have an issue.
The company that I shot for, they always had us shooting in JPEG, but when I'm shooting for myself, typically I do shoot JPEG in one card, RAW in the other card. That way, if I'm in a situation where I wasn't paying as much attention to the exposure, something gets a little blown out or a little underexposed, I do have that RAW file that I can go back to that gives me that freedom. So if it's something for myself, specifically, I'm shooting JPEG and RAW, but when I was doing volume sports, it was always in JPEG, just that's what the company wanted. What does a typical shoot day look like for you? And I know this is probably a lot to cram into 2 minutes. So, because I know everybody probably shoots a lot of different things. So whatever you shoot most of, let's focus on that. Whatever you shoot most of.
I'll get there around 7 o'clock. It takes me 15 minutes to set up. And what I like to do is kind of watch the kids, how they interact, how their hair looks and things like that. I know COVID was a little bit different, but in general, I like to be there and have like a half an hour to 45 minutes to be able to see the dynamics of my school. And then we start shooting at 8 o'clock and it takes me about a minute per child. But I do a system where 5 children will be in the area watching. It's the opposite of school photography. When you do school photography, the child has to be lined up behind the screen, right? So they don't tease each other. But in preschools, you actually do it the other way. So it's called monkey see, monkey do. And so you'll have 5 kids and then 1 child I use a table and they watch. I always finish before lunch. And sometimes it takes me 2 days for a school of like 100. I only like to shoot 50 kids a day. I'm getting spoiled. I don't know.
So we usually get to where we're shooting about an hour ahead of time, make sure wherever they have us works. If it doesn't, we have time to find another location, set up. We about 15 minutes before, you'll have parents or kids or whoever coming with questions and things like that. So we start doing that and we get them lined up and we just start shooting them one after the other. It's, rapid succession. Because we composite everything, we don't have to do a team picture. So we take 2 pictures. One is if they're standing there, with their hands behind their back or whatever pose we're doing. If it's a high school team, it'll be a different pose than hands behind your back. But if it's a youth league, we'll do the hands behind the back. If they were standing on the bleachers kind of thing, they'll do that pose and they'll do their pose with their bat or their ball or whatever, and then they're done. So we can, rip through them pretty quickly. And at the end of the day, however long it takes, we're done packing up and we're out.
We show up about an hour before the first class is scheduled and we get to our locations. We've scattered everything out. Hopefully we've been there before, so this is just a repeat. Then we set up a tent. And that's just to make sure that any direct light coming in is more diffused and easier to deal with. But we've also got fabric, black fabric, and sometimes scrims if we really need to knock the light down. But hopefully we're just dealing with it. And then a typical elementary school is 2 photographers. I try to limit it to about 125 kids a day per photographer. Because we're offering, we'll get to this later now, multiple poses. So we work with the kid a little bit before we send them on their way.
So when I was doing youth sports, my typical day would be get there about 30, 45 minutes before the shoot actually starts. Depending on the size of the league, it was usually me or maybe another photographer. We didn't get assistants, so we were customer support. We were wrangling everybody, helping them fill out their order forms and all of that stuff. But so we would go there, get our tables set up, and check the location, make sure the location was good. Sometimes we had to double check the directions. I've ended up in the wrong place a couple of times. Get everything set up, and then by the time we're done setting up is about when parents start showing up, and then usually from there it's answering questions, making sure that people have order forms, helping coaches get their teams together, and then start rolling through teams. Can you please discuss your mindset on giving parents multiple poses to choose from online versus the one yearbook pose?
If you know me well, I've always printed my proofs on order forms. And so this year, having to go online, this is how I dealt with that problem. Because believe me, all of my parents wanted to pick the yearbook picture. I emailed them and said, you can buy a new ID for $10 in which that picture will be edited and it will automatically change the picture in the yearbook. And that's how I dealt with it. So every time I got one of those parents saying they wanted to change or a kid a yearbook picture, I told them just order a new ID for $10 and then it will change that yearbook picture. So that's how my system works. I made a couple $1,000s off of that system. So it worked for me, and I'm going to continue with that system this year.
We don't do many yearbook stuff, but for volume, we used to do like pick a pose type of stuff, but it just took too long. So we stopped offering that. And when if it's a couple, if it's a small team or small league, maybe, but you get up to the big, 800,000 kids kind of leagues, and you're doing that, and it just takes forever. And you give people choices. I don't know if I want this, or can we try both of them? And then it just gets to be a real hassle. So on the volume stuff, we just said, you know what, forget it. We'll pick the pose for them. Every year we'll do something different, so the same league doesn't have the same pose. But we usually pick the pose. If a parent's insistent on a different pose, we've had that before, whatever, that's fine. But yeah, we try not to do that. It just takes too long. This way we come in, we know what we're doing. It's boom, boom, boom versus, okay, what pose do you want to do? I got to look at that. Okay, here, let's pose you this way, let's pose you that way. Maybe it doesn't look good on the kid. I don't know. We just like to get in, get out, and just everything looks consistently the same.
Definitely, whenever I was doing youth sports, it was one pose. We were checking the kids to make sure they had their eyes open, that they weren't like making funny faces or anything like that. But we did one pose. We had a lot of parents asking us if we did online proofing, and we would have to tell them no. And then, and this is back when I was doing it before with Zenfolio, but we had to tell them no. And then we would have to tell them, but you can look at the image on the back of my camera. Worst thing to ever say, because then every parent who's had their kids photo taken from that entire day wants to come back and see that. So that's definitely something to think about. What about you, Nathan? Do you guys do multiple poses? How do you handle that?
Yeah, we do multiple poses. I tell my photographers to do 15 to 20 photos per kid. And then they will often go over that, and I have to talk to them later because this is more work on the back end. We have to do our selections. I'm trying to pick 3 to 5 final images per kid. And along with that, I need to pick what's called the service item pose. It's for their IDs, if there's a class composite that get used for that. It can be in the yearbook. So that's chosen manually by my editor now. They just tagged it, I think, green in Lightroom. So when I get them back, I make sure I have the same number of green images as I do subjects. And that's how I know we didn't miss anybody. Although sometimes we miss somebody, that's a problem. So because a human has chosen the best image, it's a pretty solid. But yeah, sometimes I get parents who want it changed, usually in the class composite. Like they see the composite, like, why did you choose that one? That's the worst photo. Sometimes they're right. Humans get it wrong. I'll usually say yes to the composite. I'm trying to think, it almost never comes up for the yearbook because I'd have to go change a whole nother list of photos in the data set that's going to be used for the yearbook. So, I try not to do it because it's, like Brian said, man, it gets to be a big pain in the butt pretty quickly. So I'll even say no to changing the composite image if, like, all the parents from one classroom are now asking because I said yes to somebody and now they're all trying to do it. So I try not to change it. I said all of that to get around to try not to do that.
What percentage of your sales do you usually offer the school in a bid? So I know we're going to have different answers on this. I'll go ahead and answer first since I can't really answer this one because I wasn't really part of the business side of the volume photography that I was with. But I do know after talking to my boss that every school, and not every school, every league, they actually negotiated the contracts separately. So it wasn't a set rate, a set number. It was usually, there was a set range that they tried to work within.
We offer a percentage back. We offer banners, right, for the 8th graders, for example, for a football team, right, something like that. Or we also have done where we add a couple dollars on and then give that back to them like as a fundraiser. So we've done it a couple different ways, but school-wise, I've never had that. But for the volume stuff, that's how we kind of do it. We like to give banners out versus giving money out, but sometimes you have to do that.
Having a smaller company where I don't have to, I make decisions per school. One of my signature products that I give all of my schools is a 16 by 20 frame composite that they can put in their preschool in the office. And every year I change that out, of course. But depending on the school, the one thing people have to realize is you should educate these schools when you are giving them a rebate. At the end of the photo shoot, conclude with what you gave the school. If you're giving them IDs, teacher packets, free packets of this, a CD. So my schools, I actually educate them how much products and how much value I'm giving them, because if they see the value of what you're doing for the school, they're going to continue on keeping you every year. So I would suggest that, just write everything down. And because you don't always have to give back a percentage in money, you can give them it in products.
Yeah, so I try to give the schools $0. I know I'm going to be giving them lots of goods and services already. Free photos, ID cards, the list goes on. But sometimes you have to compete with a big name, and they've been giving the school money for years. And I usually try to say, I can't match what they gave you, but here, let me give you what I can. Because if they are hiring their photographer based on how much money they get from the photographer, I'm not really interested. It's probably not a relationship I want to maintain either, if that's the most important thing to them. I'm a small company. I'm a local company. I like to call myself boutique when I can because it sounds fancy. So sometimes I'll figure out like $1 a kid, something like that as a baseline. I'm going to start using Nikki's trick and actually, indexing all of the things I'm giving the schools. I do have one district where I don't give the schools anything, except one school I do give them a couple $100. And I had to make that principal promise not to tell the other schools because she was a stickler. She wasn't going to give me the contract without that $200. And it's only $200. But if that gets multiplied throughout the rest of the district, that could actually cost me a lot of money at the end of the year. So I'm like, this is between us. And she goes, okay.
When you're photographing groups, how long does it typically take you to photograph a group? And what is your method for getting them ready for their group photo? I know right now we're doing a lot of composites due to COVID. So let's do before COVID, pre-COVID, when we actually took real group photos. What was your method? How long did it typically take?
But preschool group pictures are the cutest things. I'm sorry, I love them. And I will not Photoshop your child to look perfect. If they're picking their nose, leave it. No. But I line up the kids by height. And if you line them up prior to putting them in the area that you're going to sit them, then it gives them a place, and then they'll sit still for that 2 minutes and you can take your pictures. So it usually takes me like 2 to 3 minutes to take a preschool picture, but we do play a game, and we sing with our hands so that they put their hands down on their laps, and we make it really fun. And but I love group pictures. I miss them.
I've never done a group picture without doing a composite. So ever since I've been doing it, I've always done compositing of the team photo. It's just our workflow, so I've never done that. So I wouldn't know.
Typical year, I'll do about half the school's composite, half the year's group photo. I prefer the group photo because they sell better in my experience. Plus, I can do a second look, a goofy option. Now I have 2 photos to sell, and those sell. I'm always amazed, but I love it. This year, of course, they're all composite. I add in about 5 minutes for the class photo, and just like Nikki, line them up by height. And then once I've got them kind of organized and make sure the teachers are in position, I actually had a principal get really upset because a teacher decided she didn't want to be in the group photo. And he's like, that's not an option. So I actually photoshopped her from 2 years ago, and the previous group photo. But I go for the kind of high energy approach. This is for elementary schools, where I jump up and down, make sure people can see me, and hands up. Okay, now in your lap, grab the photo, count to 3, get the photo, surprise them with a couple of photos, use the best one.
We would line them up by height. One of the things that I found that worked really well is, especially when you're doing larger teams, is if you stagger the rows. So if you have an even number on the back row, put an odd number in the middle, and then put it even so that everybody can get in the windows. That's one way that we used to do it. And usually we had about 5 minutes to go through. Do you shoot green screen or no? So let's go to Nikki first.
No, I haven't got to do that yet. I just shoot canvas. I make my own backdrops, and I use outdoors.
That's all we shoot is green screen.
All you shoot is green screen?
Like I've got one sport league in this spring. I might add a couple more, and I'm considering getting into what Brian does with the cutouts and compositing. And I think you can make some really cool stuff that way. I saw some great stuff at SPAC this year and last. So, but right now, no.
I try my hardest to avoid doing green screen, but sometimes it is definitely what you have to use depending on the situation or depending on the needs of whoever is hiring you, right? Sometimes the schools or the leagues just want that. I've heard where they have that ability, and so you have to go with it. Anybody have any final thoughts before we hop off of here?
I was just going to say, everybody that's in our industry, you're doing a great job. Be there for the families, be there for the kids. We're so important at this time in our life, and we are taking pictures that are historical this year. So good job, everybody.
Again, Nikki's right. Be there for the kids and the families. I love taking pictures of kids. I love hanging out with kids. I've met enough school photographers who clearly hate their job, and I don't know why they're doing it. There are much easier ways to make moderate amounts of money in the world. Pick one of those. But if you love photographing kids and hanging out with kids, this is a good line of work.
I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, photography is dead," things like that. Pictures are dead. It's not. We do a ton of photo portrait sessions, pictures. It's got to be online kind of stuff. It's got to be digital. It doesn't.
As photographers, we do a big service to the human race as keeping our history alive. And that's really important for us to remember, is that it is not dead. It's not going anywhere. When all else fails, you can pick up a photograph and hold it and have a memory. So keep that in mind. It's so important that we continue to do what we do.